everybody. My name is Nate, and it's an honor, it's a sacred thing to be able to open the Bible and share with you a little bit. Hey, Ted, thanks for the kind words. Every now and then I get asked, and you probably get asked this, why are you part of a denomination? You know why I'm part of a denomination? I'm a part of a denomination because of days like today, even though I left my room at 6:45 this morning and haven't been back. Because we work through things and we're family. I love being a part of a denomination because of things like what we just saw on the screens. That we get to be this little entity of, 1,600 churches in the United States of America, and we have brothers and sisters that outnumber us by the tens of thousands across the globe. I love being a part of the denomination because on the walk across the street, I got to meet two national leaders from Kenya, and I thought, these are the finest men I've ever met. I love being a part of this denomination because there's people in the room. There's people that aren't in the room. There was a guy named Steve Overman who put his arm around a guy that had just been expelled from Bible college. And gave him a place to learn and to grow. And because there's people like Daniel Brown who asked me two questions that altered the course of my life because of people like Ted and Diane Roberts who helped our family navigate through something we didn't know how to navigate our way through. And I'm just thankful to have a church family, and as dysfunctional as it is, right? You know how I was introduced to Foursquare? It was my high school graduation party, and my dad was a pastor in another denomination, and our district leader came, and he came up to me, he heard I was leaving, moving across the country to go to Bible college, and he did this number. He took me aside, and he goes, hey, whatever you do, when you get to Oregon, do not go to that Foursquare Church. And that is the wrong thing to say to an 18-year-old, right? I'm like, why? And that's how I started attending. I'm also, true story. I'm also slightly nervous because like 20 years ago, Randy, I'm just looking at you. 20 years ago, Jack Hayford had me do one of those little tiny morning sessions. And I'd never been him before, but I offended him. And it took me like 5 years to unravel that. So Randy, I apologize for whatever's about to happen, okay? I want to read out of Mark chapter 6. And when you're preparing to do this, it's amazing how much of your carnal nature emerges. You're trying to think, well, how do I got to find my best sermon in the last 10 years and give it to them. Or maybe this is my chance to talk about everything I don't like in Foursquare. And the Lord just lays it on your heart, man, just teach the Bible. And so we're going to go to a simple little passage that has been just fundamental in my life. And I've talked to so many, Jenny and I were just talking about this. We've talked to so many of our friends that have had such a difficult couple of years. And I'm praying that the Lord does something corporately in these several days we have together, but also through this text that would touch you. Mark chapter 6. Anybody in the room an introvert? I am so introverted. Nobody believes it, but like my favorite thing to do is sit on a stump and say nothing. This is a passage that you're going to appreciate if you're an introvert. Mark chapter 6, beginning of verse 30. The apostles gathered around Jesus, and here's the context. At the beginning of the chapter, he sent out the 12. It was their first commission. They had been entrusted, they had been listening, and then they went, and these spectacular things happened. So this is their return to Jesus. They gathered around Jesus and reported to him all they had done and taught. Then, because so many people were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat. Anybody have that today? He said to them, come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest. And I think the apostles are just like, this is our moment. It's been hectic. We've been stretching ourselves. We've been learning things, and we're tired. And then when we come back to Jesus, what's there? More people with more needs. Jesus says, hey, come with me. Come with me. Let's just spend some time together. Verse 32. So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place, but many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. So can you, like, introverts, this is your worst nightmare. You're in a boat and like people see and they start running down the shore. They're guessing where you're going. You're like, row harder, row faster. Like, they're coming. And listen to what Jesus says. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd with all the needs and all the questions, and all the confusion and all the different opinions, he had compassion on them. It's a very, very unique word. It's based out of this Greek word, sprachnidzomai. And literally, it means to feel pain, to ache in your bowels. This is the type of compassion that when you see someone, something, and you hurt, like you hurt, you identify with the pain. And as the disciples are like, get us free, what does Jesus see? He sees people in need, and he feels this profound sense of compassion within him because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And so he began teaching them many things. It's just one of those passages where you think, well, I wish we were there. It's not recorded. But when Jesus sees people in need and he feels deep, profound compassion for them, what does he want to do? He wants to bring liberty. He wants to bring truth. He wants to align the confusion in their minds and bring it to a point of clarity. But so they by this time, it was late in the day. Jesus talked a long time. So his disciples came to him. This is a remote place, they said. And it's already very late. Send the people away so they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat. But he answered them, you give them something to eat. And they said to him, that would take 8 months of a man's wages. Are we to go and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat? How many loaves do you have? He asked. Go and see. When they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Then Jesus directed them to have all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and 50s. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and looking to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. And then he gave them, in the 2 fish, looking up to heaven, broke the loaves. Then he gave them to his disciples to set before the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them. They all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls, one for each disciple, of broken pieces of bread and fish. And the number of the men who had eaten was 5,000. So we know this could have easily been a crowd of 20,000. Here's a couple of thoughts from this passage that I'd love for us to explore. The first would just be this. It's the overwhelming nature of the need. If anybody knows about the needs in your little town or the metropolis that you live in, it's you. Because you do the funerals and you go to the homes and you're in the hospitals and you talk to people in your church and you realize the pain and the dysfunction that is resident within human life. And so we see the needs, and here's what I've always noticed about needs. The needs are big. The needs are massive. The needs are bigger than the resources. The needs are bigger than the dream and the plan that I have. What are the needs in your community? I mean, there have been needs popping up all over the last couple of years. Here's one of the challenges. I've noticed that over the last 2 years, I can become acutely attuned to the needs of the disciples because they've been telling me what their needs are more than ever. They may need to do this, and they need me to take this stance, and they need me to agree with them on this and that. And I'll tell you, one of the things that I think as ministers, we not only need to understand the needs of the disciples, but we need to understand the needs of the community. Okay, what is happening at this broad level that is heartbreaking? What is being destroyed? What needs life and vitality? What needs to be healed? What are the needs in your community? And one of the ways that we've tried to do this in our context is we've tried to divide the world up into not believers and non-believers, but we use this language. Our whole staff has embraced this, that we have the spiritually unresolved and we have the disciples, okay? So it's hope. Like, there's no such thing as a non-believer. They're just currently spiritually unresolved. But once we get to them, they're going to become resolved. And here's one of the things that we have to be very, very careful of as we pastor churches. We're called to embrace a community of people, that we also have to understand the needs of the crowds. There's 20,000 people. What do they need? Not just what do they want, because what they want and what they need are often two very, very different things. But what is it that is deeply broken? What needs to be addressed that could bring vitality to a community and health and hope? What are the needs? Our needs are massive. If you watch the news for 10 minutes, we're overwhelmed by the needs. And the disciples do quick math. They estimate the size of the crowd, and then they quickly try to add together how much it would cost to buy them food. And they come up with this. It's 8 months worth of a man's wage. In today's dollars, we're probably talking about somewhere between $35,000 and $40,000. And they just look at Jesus and they say this, wait a minute. Jesus, here's what you need to understand. We're too far away. It would cost too much money. This is impossible, the logistics. It's just too much of everything. The needs in the community that are around me are too big. And here's the problem. I find myself saying the same thing to Jesus. Jesus, it's too far gone. Jesus, it would cost far too much money. Lord, I would need so many more leaders to do what we think we need to do. Jesus, it's to this, it's to that. What's your two? Here's what I've noticed, especially during COVID, is we're all like kind of gathering together. It's like I've noticed I just don't have enough. And Jesus, it's to this, the people are too mean. Lord, there's just too many needs. I don't even know where to begin. Then point number 2 is this. So you identify the needs, and you'll notice the needs are overwhelming, they're impossible, they're massive. And so they present this is impossible to Jesus. It's too much. And what does Jesus say? Point number 2, the response of Jesus. He looks at them and he says, you give them something to eat. And this is quite disturbing to me, because I know in my prayer life, I've become an expert at telling Jesus what he needs to do, right? You guys pray that way? Jesus, I'll tell you what you need to do, Jesus. You need to do this miracle and that miracle. You need to do more. And what if, I'm just asking, what if one of the things that Jesus is saying is we're seeing the overwhelming nature of the needs, is he says this, you. That's why I put you here. Here's the other thing I say. Somebody needs to do something about whatever it is. And listen, in our lives, we can either live as cynics and critics, or we can live as problem solvers. And when you point out the needs to Jesus and he tells you, you do something about it, That means the resident power of God is active in that command. You do something about it. Okay, Lord, but what about human trafficking? What about poverty? What about broken families? What about displaced people? What about, it goes on and on and on, and I just have a feeling that Jesus is looking at his church that never has enough, and he says, you do something about it. It leaves me in this place of feeling vulnerable, but I think that's exactly where Jesus wanted his disciples to be. He wanted them to, like, what do you want us to do? Lord, you know this is too big. You know this problem is unsolvable. You know we've tried it before. You give them something to eat. And if it ended there, we'd be in trouble. It'd just be a whole bunch of people out there trying their best to do something with not enough. But here's the third thing. Jesus provides them with a plan. This beautiful plan. First thing is this. He says, what do we have? What do we have? And so they do an audit, right? And they go out into this crowd of 5,000 to 20,000 people. And what do they come back with? They come back with 5 loaves and 2 fish. So this is either the meanest church you've ever met or the poorest church, right? Like, there's nothing. And the only person willing to give is this little boy. And so they come back with this measly little response. Jesus, we did an audit. We looked into the community, and this is all that we've got. I am a firm believer that what Jesus needs to do, a miracle in our cities and our churches and our towns, is resident within our cities and towns and churches. Have you ever walked into like worship practice and you're like, oh dear God, like, I am so sorry for what we're about to do. You ever have that? Or you're driving home after your weekend message and you're like, Lord, if you could find somebody else, I'd be fine with that. I would be, that was the worst sermon I've ever taught, and I tried so hard, right? So here's the point, is you just find the bit that's there. It doesn't take much for God to do a miracle. And so the first part is find what's there. You start looking around, like who has potential? Who's not like that addicted to drugs, okay? All right. Only every other week? Come on, we've got something to work with, right? Here's the second part of the plan. Jesus says, now I want you to have them sit down on the green grass in groups of 50s and 100s. And I love the 50s. For people that can't count, like, just get to 50. That is it. So you take your little bread and you're like, okay, here it is, Jesus. And then he looks at these 12 disciples who just come back feeling super victorious, and he breaks down the plan. He says, okay, guys, groups of 50s, groups of 100s, groups of 50s, groups of 100s, and have them, I love how like clear it is, sit down on the green grass. All right, anybody been to Israel? This obviously was the rainy season, because you can look a long time for the green grass, okay? And so now everybody's sitting down. And if I were one of the disciples, Jesus, you just raised their level of expectation. This is uncool, because all we have is 5 loaves and 2 fish. Here's the beauty of the plan. The needs are overwhelming. Never have enough. Jesus says, let me give you a plan. Let's just talk for a moment about this plan. Here's the plan that Jesus will give us in your context. It's doable. It's understandable. It's simple. The plan is never sacred. The plan is simply a conduit for the miracle that God wants to do in our midst. And here's the challenge with plans, is we write books about our plans. How many of us changed our church to a diamond shape because the plan that God gave Rick Warren seemed to really work for him? I remember, like, I love Wayne. I went to Wayne and I was like, man, I want to divide my church into fractals. I didn't even know what a fractal was. It's like a smaller piece. And like, guys, we got to get canoes. And they're like, we live in Montana. There's not even any water. I don't know, but we're going to get in a canoe. And like, his plan works so well. So I'm always drawn to someone else's plan. But the plan, by its very nature, has to be prophetic. He will whisper something in your ear. The dearth of resources, right? The emptiness. Here's what God does. He says, hey, just have everybody sit down, and here's what I want you to do. Let me give you an example. Our first ministry assignment was in Eugene, Oregon, and we followed this phenomenal guy named George Bomer, and we're meeting with young adults. It's the University of Oregon, okay? It's just always cloudy and smells like skunk, and that's the city. I loved it. You throw a rock and you hit 5 pagans. It was great. And I remember, like, I've had this really solid leader before me, and we're probably like 23, 24 years old, and I'm like, well, Lord, what do you want us to do? And here was the plan. Go to the students. So we had this really safe place to meet at our church, which was several miles from the university. Go to the students. All right. We went to the students, and we packed in this little house we had, and it grew. But the simple plan, that's how simple it was. What it did is it gave room for God to then be able to do the next miracles. What's the plan? What is Jesus whispering to you? He's faithful to give you a prophetic plan. I live in Billings, Montana. There's only 2 types of people in Montana. Those who buy their belt buckles and those who earn them, okay? He's got to give me a plan for the people of Montana. He's got to give you a plan, and don't discredit it because you can't draw a beautiful diagram. Man, Jesus wants to feed the people, and he'll tell you how. But it starts with incremental steps of obedience. Now here's the 4th thing, and this is by far the most important. I don't know how else to say this, but it's this. It's hand to hand to hand, all capitals, to hand to hand. Let me explain that. It's the first hand. First hand is a little nameless boy who brought 5 loaves and 2 fish. And it's in his hands. And then he takes that and he puts it into the disciples' hands. And the disciples come and they put it in to Jesus' hands, all capitals. And then Jesus takes it from his hands and he puts it back into the disciples' hands. And the disciples then go put it into the hands of the tens of thousands of hungry people. There's 2 problems with this in my mind. One, Jesus involves way too many people in this miracle, right? It's like that is messy. Can't you just go like, poof, and look there's a pile of bread. Do you notice that the bread never increases, even when it touches Jesus' hands? Jesus, he involves way too many people in his work, don't you think? We dismiss every service this way. We say, now go and be the hands and feet and mouthpiece of Jesus. And the other week, I was looking at this lady in the front row, and this is no joke. She says her poodle has a prophetic gift, and like she'll sometimes give me like words of the Lord from her poodle. And I'm looking at her, and I'm like, do I really want her to go be the hands and feet and mouthpiece? I don't want to do that. She's crazy. But eventually, the bread has to get back into the hands of the disciples. And then from the disciples, it gets into the hands of the people. And it is far too easy to keep the bread in the hands of the disciples. So when you're in Orlando, you don't have a car, you go to CVS and you get 5 hot dog buns. And 2 packs of spicy chai tuna. Bumblebee. You're so happy I didn't bring fish in here, huh? So, this is just the substance of the miracle. Jesus doesn't need a whole lot to work with, does he? And here's the important part. It comes from the hands. The resources are already in the crowd. Jesus involves the disciples. Then it comes into the hands of Jesus. And whatever tiny little thing you have, you put it in the hands of Jesus. And what does Jesus do? It says he breaks it and he holds it up to heaven. And somehow in this moment, there is a collision between the natural and the divine. Jesus says, Father, would you bless this? Would you do something that no one in this room, no one in this crowd could anticipate? And it comes from the hands of Jesus, and he gives it back to his disciples, and his disciples are instructed to give it away. It's always about giving it away. Here's the problem with the miracle. We're never told when and how the bread and fish multiplies. So point number 4. You have to ask this question: how big is my God? Because I did a little math, even if there were only 5,000 people. In terms of bread, it would be 1/1000th of a piece of bread. So you just took one of these and you broke it up into 1,000 pieces. This is how much there would be for. Right? It's just like, now it's just a little dough ball. And everybody's super hungry. It's late in the day. And it gets worse with the fish. It's 4/10,000th of a piece of fish. I mean, you're like, here's a scale or like a tiny piece of bone. And now, okay, we estimate even just 5,000 people. So this is super conservative. Each disciple would have 6 groups of 150. And so here's what Jesus just gave me. He said, oh, you give them something to eat. And you're like, I gotta walk towards. Man, they're hungry. Look at them. They're gonna bite my head off. I'm like, right? So this really comes down to this decision: how big is my God? How big is my God? Because there are hungry, famished, desperate, hangry people in the crowd. And you and I are going to have to make a decision, because I wish that what God did is he just added zeros to your bank account. Wouldn't that be fantastic? But he says, no. You give me the $112 left at the end of the month, put it in my hands, and then start giving it away. So if my God is truly big, if my God is able, I have this question. Yaz, I either going to give you a crumb, or I'm going to say, yes, I'm overwhelmed. I do not have enough. I'm walking towards thousands of hungry people. But I believe in this Jesus who touched this bread. So here's your piece, buddy. And there's some for you. And I'm down to 4. But I still believe. And there's something that happens in the giving away, the sacrificial. It's beyond comprehension. I don't know how God is going to do this, but he's going to do something. I'm going to walk towards the crowd that needs more than I have to offer them. And instead of giving them a tiny little piece as if my God was a God of scarcity, I choose to obey, and I choose to give away the biggest pieces that I can give. And I don't know how it happens, but somehow or another, at the end of the day, the disciples come back with 12 basketfuls of broken pieces. Here's how I'd like us to pray this evening. I want you to think about your context. I want you to think about the challenges that we've been facing. I want you to acknowledge the needs are too big, and I'm too small, and I'm not smart enough, and we don't have enough leaders, and my worship team is awful, and my ushers they needed an ashtray in front of church before we even get started. And, man, my high school group is one kid, and you know what I'm saying? Here's what Jesus says. You do something about it. But I won't leave you alone. Find what's there. Bring it to me. From the hands to the next hand, to the hands of Jesus, and the hands that then distribute, and somehow we're in the midst of it, this God of abundance, this God of miracles, feeds desperate, hungry crowds. He satiates the needs of people who are desperately in need. And for some reason, he uses you. And he uses me. And we are simply conduits. This is what I pray. I pray that God gives you a plan. Would you join me in prayer? Lord, the needs, they are big, they're intimidating, they induce fear and intimidation, and so often we draw back, we want to hide, because we don't have enough, there is not enough. And Lord, we pray, Lord, would you do something about my community? Would you do something in this church? Would you do something in the schools? And the voice of Jesus, who always works through human partnership, speaks back and says, you do something about it. Let me give you a plan. Let me give you simple steps. Lord, I know that there are many of us who are watching online, many of us in the room, who have been trying our best. It's not a lack of effort, but we need a prophetic plan. We need insight from you, something that is achievable, something that requires a step of obedience. And Lord, as we do that, would your hand touch? Would your hand multiply? And would we, with boldness, rather than with fear, head towards the needs? It's with boldness, it's with this deep conviction that God is a God of abundance and that God is a God who creates, that the one who spoke the world into existence is still active in our world today. Ex nihilo, out of nothing, you've created something. And Lord, I pray that there would be a creation event that would happen in our lives, in our churches, where you would make new things and you'd be able to say this, that is good. In the name of Jesus, we pray this. Amen. Amen.